Hi, my name's Jay Martin and this is my video essay on how different types of sound are used in film. I'll be looking at 3 different clips from 3 very different films: Interstellar, Jurassic Park and Watchmen. Now there can be no doubt that sound is an integral part of any modern film. Sound helps to enthrall us in the worlds that we're seeing on screen. Example, could you imagine watching this iconic scene on mute? Yeah, kinda loses some of the impact without sound to be heard. There can be no doubt that the next few clips we're going to be taking a look at will be completely different and would lose their impact entirely without the use of the sound techniques that have become standard in today's motion pictures. Now, before we get started, there's some vocabulary I'd like to briefly cover. The first being diegetic sound. Diegetic sound is defined as any sound that would naturally occur within the frame, such as a fist impacting on someone's face, a gun being fired, or simply the character's dialogue.
How you doing?
Which put simply are the words that the characters speak. Diegetic sound can be created in one of 2 ways. The first being via the use of Foley, which is where sounds are created specifically to mimic the sounds that are happening within the scene, and are then redubbed in post. Now, I'm sure everyone watching has seen Indiana Jones at some point or another. Now, the diegetic sound we see in the film was actually all created by hand, using various different objects and devices, by a man that is known as the father of modern sound design, Mr. Ben Burtt. Although you may not have heard of Ben before, you've definitely heard some of his work. The second method is sound effects, or SFX. This is where a sound is created by a computer or via Foley and is altered and changed in order to meet the specific needs of the sound designer. The primary difference between the two? Foley isn't change, sound effects are. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, but they both help to immerse us further in the film we're watching. Secondly, we have external diegetic. This is any sound that would conceivably occur within the environment which we are seeing within the frame, but we don't actually see the thing causing the sound. For example, 2 characters are walking through a park. We have the pair in a mid-shot, but can hear the sounds of children playing and birds chirping, but we don't actually see them. This is external diegetic. And lastly, we have non-diegetic sound. This is by far the easiest of the trio. Non-diegetic sound is any sound that wouldn't naturally occur within the frame, such as narration or soundtrack or sound score. My example for this one Now, I'm pretty sure Norman Bates isn't standing there with his Walkman playing that now iconic track or stabbing that lady to death, right? So to recap, non-diegetic sound is most commonly sound added in post to give a sense of dramatic tension, i.e. psycho, or in the form of narration to help clarify the situation or give us insight into a character's psyche. The best example I can think for narration is The Shawshank Redemption.
So when Andrew Dufresne came to me in 1949 and asked me to smuggle Rita Hayworth into the prison for him, I told him, no problem.
Where Red is constantly narrating the story, helping the viewer to understand what is happening and what's going to occur. With that out of the way, it's time to move on to our first clip from Christopher Nolan's sci-fi epic, Interstellar. Now, this scene is notable for its somewhat lack of diegetic sound. You'll notice that the only diegetic sound that we hear is when the camera is brought inside the ship with the 2 characters.
What are you doing?
Docking.
It gives us that sci-fi feel and also conveys a sense of presence as we hear the creaks and bleeps that the ship makes. However, when we bring the camera outside,
It's not possible.
No, it's necessary.
now that leads us on to the non-diegetic section. There's a complete lack of diegetic sound. What we do hear, however, is, as I mentioned, the non-diegetic sound. We hear Hans Zimmer's incredible score shining through. We begin with a slow build-up of a few beats whilst the characters discuss the next move. And as the tension of the scene rises, so does the score. It reflects that perfectly. Now, the music used in the scene, in my opinion, is what gives it that tension. It builds up this atmosphere of genuine fear from the viewer, as we literally have no idea what's about to happen. Now, what is also very notable when watching the scene is how inaudible the dialogue from Hathaway and McConaughey is. We can barely hear them over the music being played. Now, this is obviously an intentional move by Nolan. Now, although 99% of the time, we as viewers expect the dialogue that we're hearing to be audible, so that we can fully understand what's happening. However, this time, that's not the case. Nolan's trying to convey that what the characters are saying in this moment is not important. What is important is the impending danger, which is represented by the loudness of the score. Within this scene, the director has chosen to use a sound score, which is music created specifically for a certain moment or scene. But why has he chosen to use handcrafted score instead of pre-existing music? Because that way, Nolan can convey exactly what he wants to convey. Having a custom score means that all the music we hear is tailored directly to what we're seeing on screen. So going on around us, we're reminded that in the centre of all this chaos sit our two characters, something that couldn't be achieved by some cheesy pop song. Next up, we have the legendary Jurassic Park, directed by Steven Spielberg. In sharp contrast to the previous clip, we have a lot of sound going off here. Firstly, the diegetic sound. We hear rain, footsteps, roars, the car being smashed apart, buildings being destroyed, total chaos. And the diegetic sound reflects what we're seeing on screen. I believe that Foley was used to create this sound to give them a more genuine feel and help immerse us in the scene, to make it more believable. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a complete lack of SFX, the most notable being using a bit of computer manipulation to make that roar a tad extra bassy and give it that real terrifying feel wouldn't have been achieved as effectively had Foley been used. Next up, the non-diegetic sound, or lack thereof. You see, opposed to our clip from Interstellar, where non-diegetic sound took centre stage, this time we're left with none. But why do this? Well, I believe it's because Spielberg wanted us completely invested in this scene and what was happening right in front of our eyes. Having a lack of narration or music leads us to concentrate on every little sound we're hearing, and in this case, I do believe that it does immerse us further within that scene. On to dialogue now. This is one of the driving forces of this scene, as we hear the genuine fear in every character's voice. We see a wide variety. The way that everybody talks, or in the case of the kids, screams, tells us a bit more about their character. The way that characters deliver their dialogue can tell us a bit more about their character. For example, in this case, the children are young, innocent, and terrified. And Grant, well, he's an expert. He knows everything there is to know about the T-Rex and exactly how to deal with it. And the way he delivers his dialogue reflects that. All of these help to build up the overall atmosphere of tension and fear within the scene, and each individual element helps to bring us into the scene even more. Lastly, we have Zack Snyder's Watchmen. Now, there's a lot going on in this scene. As always, we'll start with the diegetic sound, and there's a lot of it. We have these incredible explosive punches that the characters are throwing. We have them impacting on the environment, and also the characters' dialogue, which, although minimal, is very effective at conveying to the viewer who these people are.
Just a matter of time, I suppose.
The comedian's gruff-sounding voice conveys a sense of power, whereas the assassin's complete lack of dialogue almost conveys a sense of professionalism and mystery. So, onto the punches and impacts and general fight sounds. Now, I'd hedge my bets on this being the use of sound effects over Foley. This conveys the power that both the comedian and the assassin wield, and how much of a clash they have when the two begin fighting. Quite clearly, the majority of the diegetic sound we hear is exaggerated greatly, but again, it just helps to build up the adrenaline of the scene. On to my favourite part of the scene from a sound perspective, the non-diegetic sound. That being most evidently the soundtrack. Now, soundtrack are any piece of music previously existing, which is used by the director to both make the scene more relatable and also help to promote the film and the artist further. Think Will Smith releasing Wild Wild West along with his film Wild Wild West. Now, although this isn't the case in this particular scene, the beautifully used Unforgettable by Nat King Cole helps establish the time period, and also, I'd argue, more importantly, foreshadows a later revelation in the film, which sees the reveal of the assassin and why they are so obsessed with the superheroes that they kill, making each kill they make unforgettable. There's also an obvious contrast to the calm demeanour of the song and the brutal fight that's raging in the background.